Ladies and gentlemen, for those of you who keep coming here, you remember that normally I would moderate. I'm very glad that Robert took that tonight for me, that duty. And I got this special, I think, a great honor to introduce our awardee, Secretary Chirkov. For me, that is a personal thing. When you would look at the list of the awardees, there is a number of those who were also personal things to me. Some of those who's got bound to Czechoslovak, like the last year, you remember Secretary Albright. Well, she inherited the bond. She was born with a bond to Czechoslovakia, as we call this Czech and Slovak Transatlantic Award. And I don't say that was easy and natural for her. She's been a great talent, and she did great things in her life. Maybe Zbigniew Brzezinski, whom we offered the award. I went on behalf of the committee to see him. I met him a zillion times. He was a very close friend to a number of us here in the room. And Zbig told me, I made my own decision some years ago that I'm not going to accept any more. No state award, no NGO award, no award at all, because then I look like I'm fishing for those awards and I look already like a Christmas tree. But if you want, I will come and I'll speak. We got him 3 years ago, and Zbig delivered a great visionary speech. But since we are in the room and since I'm going to make this special introduction, I want to come back a little back in the time to the same building when I got a couple of witnesses in the room. For sure, Minister Lajčák would remember that. I'm sure that Martin Butora would remember. Milan Ježovica would remember. Ivan, you would remember as well, I think. There was a meeting in 2001 of 10 prime ministers led by, at that time, Mikuláš Dzurinda, member of our honorary board here, where Dr. Brzezinski came and delivered a very substantial speech about the future of NATO. This was in the same building here, not in this room, I think down in the restaurant. This was a dinner speech like tonight, where he advocated for NATO enlargement, for building partnerships, relationships, etc., for about what is a transatlantic award. And there was the question from the audience at the end of the debate by German ambassador, who said, Dr. Brzezinski, how can we enlarge NATO to Baltics? How we will defend Baltics? It's undefendable. And Brzezinski, you remember his style, very simple, very humble, not too many words, no wasting of the words and the time. He said, Mr. Ambassador, the same way how we defended the Western Berlin. Smart. Nothing changed since. Brzezinski, he was also born to the region like Madeleine Albright. But now we got an awardee which is a little different, on the same values, on the same page, but for whom the Czech and Slovak or the regional bond, let me quote Peter Mayle, is an acquired taste. I was ambassador since 2003 to 2008 in Washington, in a time where Secretary Chirkov was nominated on the secretary position. I came to Washington with a nightmare mission to turn Slovak first-class relationship through NATO and all of the cooperation through military missions and whatever, bonds of cooperation, into also a true first-class treatment. Slovakia, among other things, was not on the visa waiver list. We were still a visa country, and I tried to persuade U.S. government, among other ambassadors, that this has to change, to keep the spirits, to keep the emotion. We should change that, which was quite a mission impossible. And Senator, you would know how hard it is to lobby on the Hill. This was a nightmare for all of us ambassadors to persuade, because this required a new legislation. We got a great ally and advocate with Secretary Chirkov. To me, I want to make him as an example of somebody in politics who can take responsibility with no hysteria, no populism, but he is a do man. This was a hard life for him after September 11th, in introducing measures to make America safe. And look, he managed, and his successor managed. There was no major terrorist attack since. So it's a great success. But he also managed how to manage the relationship, how to turn the first-class relationship into the first-class treatment. At the end, when I was leaving, after working very hard with him, and he was no man, to give up or no excuse. He said, you need to do this. Tuck, 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 tuck. He's a man of things. He would look at the thing and say, okay, maybe we can do it, but for that we need to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and there'll be no champagne, no fireworks, and there'll be hard work behind. Secretary Chertov is among those who are patriots. He loved his country. I'm Slovak diplomat for 25 years now. I love my own country. I take my job saying Slovakia the first. But I know very well, like he knew, that taking my first, the best way how to do it is to do it in partnership, which makes us all stronger. And he's been the prime example to me as a leader who's been running the department, who's got the most governmental employees in the United States. Man of extreme power, having in the hands. Man of brilliance, of the brain, which is far beyond the average, but the man who, regardless of those things, stayed humble, down to the earth, a friend, or somebody who we dearly admire and love. And please, Secretary Chertov, dear Michael, let me invite you to the floor to take the award and to say something.
Well, thank you, my friend. I'm very touched and was extremely and pleasantly surprised when I received an email and a call a few weeks ago indicating that I was going to be awarded this award. And I looked at the list of people who've been lauded, and I felt myself in very good company and a little overwhelmed by some of the important and notable dignitaries and contributors who received this award. It actually turns out, I learned yesterday, that this is about the 10th anniversary of when I came to Slovakia and to the Czech Republic to sign the papers that officially ushered these countries, as well as a number of other countries of the region, into the visa waiver program. And it actually was one of the most memorable and positive experiences of my 4 years as Secretary of Homeland Security. First of all, it was one of the times I was able to announce a decision that made everybody happy. Usually I was announcing decisions about how you're going to get searched more, or you can't bring that on a plane. But this was actually a pleasure to do. But I remember in speaking to my counterparts that they said to me, this is a step that to us recognizes the final stage of our being fully welcomed into the community of Western nations, symbolizing that we have finally completed the journey from having been satellites of the old Soviet Union to being full-fledged partners, trusted members of the Western Alliance. And to be honest, I had not really thought about it in those terms, but I realized that there was tremendous symbolic value in opening the doors of the U.S. to countries like Slovakia and the Czech Republic. The truth is, over the years I was in office and since, I remain acutely aware of what great friends the Czech Republic and Slovakia are to the United States. You've stood with us and contributed in a variety of difficult situations, challenges ranging from September 11th to all the subsequent issues we had to deal with in fighting in Afghanistan, dealing with terrorism, and standing more recently shoulder to shoulder as we look at a rising Russia and a raging Putinism. What ties us together is first and foremost the allegiance to democratic values, values of freedom, values of voting, values of the rule of law. That is the common bond which brings our countries together and makes us very, very strong friends and allies. I would also be remiss if I didn't observe, and I guess it was kind of implicit in what was said earlier about Secretary Albright, but many Americans have close family relations with people in the Czech Republic and Slovakia because America is largely a nation of immigrants, and many of those immigrants came from this region. At one point I was told, and I've never verified it, that my paternal grandmother came from Slovakia. The truth is, although I know my ancestors came from Eastern and Central Europe, those of you who studied history know that the borders changed quite a bit, and at any given moment, what was Poland might have been the Ukraine, and what was Slovakia might have been Hungary. But in terms of the region, there's no question that I, like many Americans, have a family heritage coming from this region, and that makes it particularly personally pleasing for me to be here. I will say that the relationship between the United States and the Czech Republic and Slovakia has never been more important than it is now. We are facing challenges in terms of our dealing with Putin and Russia that, frankly, a lot of people thought had gone away in 1990 when the Berlin Wall fell. And actually, it is people in this area, in this region, that really are on the front line of watching a rising and increasingly aggressive Russia. For example, well before we had the experience of the 2016 election of Russians trying to intervene and affect the outcome of an American election, people in this region were feeling and understanding the effects of Russian active operations and disinformation campaigns. I remember one of the notable experiences I've had over the years I've been involved in advising GlobSec is a session at Chateau Bella a couple of years ago, where in considerable detail, and somewhat to my surprise, people laid out exactly how the Russians use commercial media, social media, investments through their businesses, even clergymen, to infiltrate and promote their point of view of geopolitics to people in this part of Europe and even in Western Europe as well. And that was something which I was very impressed by. But when I went back to the United States and I said, you know, the Russians are engaged in information operations, they suddenly put propaganda out, they try to influence attitudes, and by the way, they're quite successful. If you do polling, you see they are actually able to move a significant percentage of the population to be somewhat anti-American. When I went back to the US and talked about it, people looked at me like I was having a flashback to the Cold War. Unfortunately, we've now learned firsthand that that was no flashback, it was prophecy. And I credit the people of this organization, GlobSec, and more generally the people of these communities, with recognizing and beginning the struggle against this kind of effort to destabilize and undermine the morale of our Western democracies. The reality is, if you're cold-blooded and clear-eyed, you recognize that Vladimir Putin aims to reconstitute the sphere of influence that the Soviet Union had back in the glory days of his KGB experience. But we as Americans don't recognize spheres of influence. There is no model of geopolitics in which Russia gets to dominate, control, and dictate to countries in Eastern Europe and Central Europe simply because there was a time that the Soviet Union occupied those countries. Rather, we believe, as you do, that this is all about self-determination. Every country chooses its own destiny by its own citizens in accordance with its own values, and nobody is obliged to serve in a sphere of influence of a larger power, whether it's to the east or to the west. From the standpoint of the United States, at least in my experience, we are partners. We don't dominate, and you're not subordinate, but we rather work together as allies. But I want to take a moment finally to talk about another issue. We did a panel today on the issue of democracy in the digital age, and we asked the question whether some of the developments, particularly in recent years, threaten the viability of our democracy. When I was younger, I was taught that the natural progress of world history moved in the direction of democracy and what we call liberal values, and that inevitably and inexorably the world was going to migrate in that direction. But the reality is, the triumph of democracy and the rule of law is not foreordained. It is not guaranteed, and it is not inevitable progress. If we read the newspaper and we look all over the Western world and in other parts of the world, we see, remarkably, the beginning of a rising affection for the idea of an autocracy, where some people seem gravitating to the idea of a strong man, whether it's in the Philippines, whether it's in parts of South America. You see it also in some of the campaigns, happily not so successful for the most part here in Europe, and you see some impulses in the rhetoric in the United States. There are many causes of this, and I don't profess to know what they are. I know that there is a genuine and understandable disillusionment on the part of some people with the way the system has functioned for them, with economic downturns, the rise of globalization, the rise of technology. Maybe more disturbingly, I've seen the rise of tribalism, and here social media has sometimes aided and abetted the tendency of people to view political decisions and fundamental issues not through the eyes of what their values are, but through whether it's my team or the other team. If it's my team, no matter what we do, I support it. If it's the other team, no matter what they do, I oppose it. That is an appropriate approach to dealing with football. It is not an appropriate approach to governing or dealing with politics. So we have a lot of work to do. I remember after the fall of the wall, Francis Fukuyama famously, and I'm sure he regrets it now, wrote a book called The End of History, which was kind of the declaring victory at the fall of the Soviet Union in terms of the rise and success of liberal democracy. But if there's one thing history teaches you, it is as soon as you declare victory, you're in big trouble, because that's when it starts to unwind. The reality is democracy, which I know we all believe in and value, will only continue to succeed if we fight for it, if we commit to it, if we don't take it for granted, if we work together, and if we never lose sight of that set of values, which many of you or your relatives and ancestors fought for to free yourselves from the yoke of the Soviet Union and from other invaders, which we fought for over the years of developing our independence, and which we and our children have to continue to fight for if we're going to preserve the values which are represented by this organization, by this award, by the visa waiver program, and by our common interest in freedom, democracy, and the rule of law. Thank you very much. God bless you.